Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Reawakened Mom podcast. And I am here today with Dr. Samantha Goldman. And she is actually a pediatric occupational and feeding therapist who's on a mission to help parents finally understand sensory processing, which I cannot wait to dive into. But before we do, how are you doing today, Samantha?
I'm doing good, doing good. Florida is nice and like a little bit chilly today for us is a weird thing. So I am enjoying it.
Okay, so what's the temperature? Like if it's chilly, what is it? What is the actual temperature out? Do you know?
I think in the morning it was like 50s, which
Okay.
for us is like super cold and
Yeah.
we're all like so happy.
Yeah. Oh. And so just so you guys won't be able to tell as you're listening to this podcast, or even if you go and watch on YouTube, but Samantha is actually pregnant with her first little. Tell us when you're due.
Yeah, and actually it's so funny. So I have not announced it to any of my audience yet. So this is probably going to be like the first time that people actually hear about it. I am due in 2 weeks. So
Oh.
March 12th, coming soon.
Yeah. So when this podcast episode actually comes out, she will have already actually had the baby because this podcast episode won't be coming out in March, but so we're not spoiling anything here. They are all going to know that you've already had a baby at that point. So we're really excited for you, but I would love to just know a little bit about your journey if you would just kind of tell us how you got into what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so I'm an occupational therapist. In school, I always thought I was going to be a vet or a doctor or, like growing up when I was like a kid. And then when I actually got to college and I realized just how intense it was going to be as either like a vet or a doctor being on call all the time and what they actually did, I was like, "Oh, I don't think this is really for me." And I kind of went back to the drawing board and somebody had just said, "Hey, I think you would be a really good fit for OT." And so I booked a meeting with the dean and she explained it to me. And the way that she explained it, it did just seem like totally up my alley. She's like, "You help people with kids and with adults and you help them get to do the things that they want to do in life that they can't do anymore." And it sounded just exactly kind of what I was looking for. At the time, I really had no idea that I would end up in the hospital system. So, if you were going to ask me, I would probably say that I am one of those people that is really bad with blood, right? Like, if I see blood on my own, like whenever I would pass out, not pass out, but like get the low blood pressure where you feel like
Yeah.
you're going to, when I would get shots or my blood taken, and I never thought that I would end up in the hospital system. But, things just kind of naturally ended there. My husband got relocated for work, and I gave it a shot in a kid's hospital. And I realized one, when it wasn't on me, it felt different. And then two, I just loved being in the hospital supporting these families because you really made so much of a difference in their life. So, long story short, from there, I got frustrated a little bit with OT and our ability to support parents and how we don't really have the adequate amount of time to go in, educate parents that they needed. And I
Mhm.
really felt like that was missing. And so that's how I'm doing what I'm doing now is I started to create resources for parents because I couldn't find what I wanted online to send them to.
Yeah. So for parents that have no idea what even like sensory processing is, because maybe they are new, they just had their first child, or maybe their child experiences things, but they don't know, they just think it's normal, or they don't know where to start. Like, can you explain at first, like, what is sensory processing?
Yeah, so that's always like the best questions because people will come and they'll say, "I think my child has sensory issues," but I
Hmm.
have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
And most people have no idea that sensory and processing even go together. So we talk about sensory processing, it's the way that our body takes in everything in the world around us and from inside of our body. So our senses and what we're sensing and how it organizes in our brain
Yeah.
and then how we respond to it. So, for example, I hear a horn honking. And so my brain immediately registers, "Hey, a horn's honking. That means I might be in danger." And then I respond by looking at it.
Hmm.
So it's that process of what happens in our brain. And it's actually really interesting because we have 8 senses, not 5. And so that I think is
Oh,
one of the most surprising things to people.
oh. Do you want to save that till the end, or do you want to tell us what they are? I'm like, what are they? Should I guess?
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
we could talk about it. You could guess.
Yeah.
You might have
Okay,
heard of
no,
some of
no,
them
no, no.
before.
Yeah. Tell us what they are.
Yeah, so we have 3 senses that kind of nobody ever talks about, and they are called our interoceptive sense. So, our sense of what is going on inside our body. So, how we know we're full, how we know that we have a headache. We feel it, right? That's a
Yeah.
sense telling us, hey, I'm not feeling so good, or hey, my stomach's rumbling. I'm hungry, feed me. Our proprioceptive sense, or our sense of body awareness. So, if you close your eyes, you know that you're sitting up, right? I know I'm not falling out of my chair. That's my proprioceptive sense telling me where my body is. And then our vestibular sense, or our sense of head movement. So I know when I turn this way, my head moved, and I can adjust my body to that because my vestibular sense told me where I am.
So the last one was your vestibular. What is it?
Mhm. Vestibular, yep, you got it right.
And so that's the sense of your head moving,
It's your head and your body moving.
your head,
So
your
it
body.
actually comes, it's super interesting from our inner ear. We have fluid in our inner ear.
Yeah.
And so when you shift your head, the fluids move, the hairs move, we have little crystals that move. And that's how we know that our head moved.
Wow. And so that's different from the second one, which is body awareness. So that's different than that.
They're different, but they work so closely together. So
Mm.
if my head moves, then my proprioceptive sense, my body awareness has to adjust, right? So I don't fall out of my chair.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so now that we know that there's 8 senses, like mind blown, like that's we're done, right? Are we done the podcast? No, I'm just kidding. But tell us about so sensory processing. So a parent might be thinking, okay, well, that's great. Like now I know like there's these extra senses, and I know that my child maybe has these like there's some sensory processing things, but like, can you explain a little bit more about maybe what might a parent be seeing, what might be some maybe red flags? I don't want to call them that, but like some things that parents are noticing that are like, huh, something isn't right here. Maybe my child is having an issue and I don't know what to do about it, or I don't know, is this normal or not? Can you explain like a couple more things so people that are like, hmm, is this normal? Or yeah, that would be a sensory processing issue. Maybe I should seek out help for that.
Yeah. And it's so good that we already talked about the 8 senses because there's different ones for each sense, right? It's not like we're looking at this overall just as this is one big sensory issue. Usually it's caused by one or more of the senses. So, something that a lot of parents see is kids might have a hard time getting dirty. We see those little hands go up. We have kids who tend to avoid sensory input, are sensory avoiders. And if they get messy, they get really upset getting dressed. So, like certain textures of clothing might
Hmm.
be really hard for somebody, certain temperatures. That's kind of all of our touch sense.
Hmm.
But then we also can do, we see a lot of kids covering their ears
Hmm.
or having a hard time going to the bathroom. Some kids will hold going to the bathroom because it doesn't feel good. That's
Yeah.
that interoceptive sense. We also, when it comes to those vestibular sense and those proprioceptive sense, we can see a lot of kids maybe hitting, pushing, throwing when they get upset, a lot of big emotions and meltdowns.
Hmm.
So I would say one of the ones that we get the most for is, or like referrals for, is those big emotional meltdowns, the sensory meltdown versus like a tantrum,
Hmm.
where they're just so overstimulated that the body just shuts down, right? It
Yeah.
can't come back from it. We're totally, totally gone. We need time to recover. One of the more subtle things we see that I think this one gets missed so much is kids who have a hard time with coordination. So things like going to gymnastics and a parent's realizing, they're having a hard time following along. All these other kids, they seem to be able to do these movements, and my child isn't able to plan out those movements. They're not able to follow the teacher. They're
Hmm.
a little bit weaker. A lot of sometimes those strength deficits come from our proprioceptive, that body awareness sense.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So then, okay, so a parent is noticing, like just listed so many great things that a parent might be seeing, whether it's one of those or maybe it could be multiple things that they're seeing. what's the next step? So like they notice this, maybe they contact you. What are some things that parents can do to help their child? Like, can this be solved? Like, is it something that can be, I don't want to say like I'm doing air quotes like fixed, solutions for? Like, is it something that can be fixed? Or how do you help parents help their child?
Yeah, so I would say that's a big,
Yeah.
what's the word I'm thinking about? Debate in our
Hmm.
community is, can sensory issues be fixed?
Yeah.
If there was a study that came out a couple years ago that kids with sensory processing disorder, their brain structure is actually different than somebody without sensory challenges, which is so interesting because until then, we really didn't know that, right? We didn't know what was going on. But the brain actually looks a little different. And so when it comes to, the quote unquote fixing, the question is, are we really trying to change a child or are we trying to support a child?
Hmm.
And I tend to be more on the we're trying to support a child, neurodiversity affirming, especially because we see so many autistic children, right? And we really are working hard in the industry to be more neurodiversity supporting. So, yes, sensory, we can have changes over time,
Hmm.
right? We can have improvements. We can help kids better respond to sensory information, but it's not that there's a fault of the child.
Right.
It's more that their sensory needs and their personal sensory system is not matching up with our world right now because our world is not very neurodiversity supporting.
Yeah. So
So
you're
when
teaching them how to help the child. So obviously we're not trying to fix the child here, but you're trying to help it so that it's better for the child so that they can function better in the world and in the craziness that's happening, like some tools that they have in their toolkit to function on a better level so that they feel good.
yeah, so when somebody comes to us, what we are doing primarily, I kind of say there's two different tracks here. The first one and the one that we want to do kind of right away is we want to support the child. We want to
Yeah.
figure out what their personal needs are, right? So what their personal body needs because every single person's different. So, I might get hot really quick and you might get cold really quick.
Mhm.
And we might just have those different needs. So, the very first thing I'm doing with the parent is helping them understand their child, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times their kids are giving subtle cues that we're not picking up on. And by supporting those needs, we're helping their child navigate their world better, be more confident in the world, feel like they can go do these things. So, something as simple as, hey, like they're having a hard time putting on clothing. Let's look at the different alternatives of clothing we can use. So we call these modifications. That's what we call it in the OT community or compensations. On the other hand, our brain grows every single day. Every single second, it lays down new pathways. So we also want to help kids learn, right? Just
Mhm.
like kids without sensory needs, we want to help learn. So we will also work on how do we help them get used to this different sensory information? How do we help them navigate it, even if it is hard, in a
Mhm.
way that their body learns, like, okay, I don't need to respond to the scratchy sticker on the back of my shirt. It's really not that big of a deal. And we call that systematic desensitization. That is kind of also a debate in the industry, but I tend to fall more on the all kids learn. How do we help them do it in a way that feels good for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I used to be a school teacher too, so like this makes total sense to me on just like things to modify and things like that. And because we are all totally different, and so there's no reason that there is not anything that we can all do. You know what I mean? Like we all just might do it differently. We might get to that path a different way, but we can all learn. We can all do amazing things. So I love that you are doing that and helping because it is something I feel like in the school system too, like they might not have as much time to do, or there's so many kids that, they might not be able to recognize it as much because the teacher is the one maybe saying there might be an issue, but there's so many things you have to get to like in a school system. So the parent being the advocate and coming to you and saying, "Hey, I recognize these things." Like I think that's a great thing. Do you have certain age groups that you work with primarily, or is it any age child?
So, as an OT in general, I've worked anywhere from 0 in the NICU up until 21.
Yeah.
But in my personal education, I usually focus it more towards parents of kids age 3 plus.
Okay.
But I did want to touch on that school system for a second because you asked what kind of signs some parents will see. A lot of the times, our sensory kids, they tend to be the ones who are pegged as troublemakers in school. And they're the ones who can't sit still in the classroom. They're the ones who are getting up all the time when they've been told to sit down. They're the ones who might be screaming out loud and
Hmm.
just having a hard time kind of controlling their
Yeah.
body and that regulating. And yeah, so a parent coming and saying, "Hey, I'm seeing this," getting support both in and out of the classroom can be life changing for them.
Yeah, yeah. So then you're working with the parent and then you're trying to, make these modifications, whatever it may be. What kinds of things do you teach like the student as well, like the child? Like what kinds of things are you working on with them depending on, wherever they're having, their issue or wherever they're having their sensory processing issue? How do you work with them to kind of have them advocate for themselves as well? Because I think that is so important because the parents are there, but but then when they do go to school, like the child also needs to learn the language to be able to advocate for themselves, which I think is really important.
Oh my gosh, I think that's the most important. And I think you should start it from when they are super little, giving them, two choices of things. But with our older kids, having them learn about their body is so powerful. It's really powerful to be able to connect to our body and
Hmm.
know what's happening. And as adults, we have a hard time with that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll pop at somebody and then I'm like, oh, I was overstimulated, right?
Yeah.
So, teaching kids about this is so powerful. So, I actually love to use, and something I use in my program is something called our sensory thermometer. And that's how I say how our body feels on any given day. So, sometimes we're too hot, sometimes we're too cold. And I think that's a really easy thing to teach a child.
Hmm.
And what do you see when your body's too hot? So, like some kids, when they're too hot, they're hitting, they're pushing. Other kids, when they're too hot, they're running around the classroom.
Yeah.
When they're too cold, they're kind of falling asleep at the table. They're spacey and they're, looking all over. I don't hear my mom calling me. And so having kids connect that to this is what's happening. And then from there, what strategies actually help me in that situation? And
Hmm.
so, okay, I'm feeling too hot. I know I'm feeling too hot. Maybe I could raise my hand and tell my teacher, like, hey, I need to go to the bathroom because I need to go for a walk.
Hmm.
Or maybe I can ask for a certain type of chair that's maybe a little bit more movement, more supportive for me. How do we actually connect that for kids and teach them to ask and advocate for their needs?
Yeah, I love that because I do think there's very minimal that is taught about like your body, right? Or it's like good touch or bad touch. Like that's maybe the only things that you're learning, but you're not really learning to know yourself, which I think even us as adults can have a really hard time with. And it's probably because it's things that we didn't learn as a child, maybe. Maybe we learned the bare basics and you had health class and you learned the very basic there, but actually learning to be in touch with your body and recognize that is really important. Do you do any type of like journaling or anything, or have the kids like kind of take note of these kinds of things? Like, okay, when I felt this way, or kind of just make a tick in their brain just to kind of know, like, oh, wait a second. Or is that too high level? I'm just curious. Like, I'm just really curious about this.
So I think it really depends on the child, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to have a 2-year-old, of
Right.
course, journaling, but with our older kids, there is a program called the Zones of Regulation. And those come with actual handouts that connect to, that they
Yeah.
fill out. You
Yeah.
teach about emotions, you teach them about their feelings in their body, and then actually write them down. So I think one of the most effective ways to do it is to have them write down different strategies so that they can pull from it. And
Yeah.
I'll do it differently with different kids, right? So, like a kid who loves Pokemon cards, I'm going to use that fire card. I'm going to use that ice card. I'm going to use that green card. And maybe we make our own Pokemon cards that have different strategies on them. So,
Hmm.
like, they're sitting there thinking, oh, hey, my body's hot right now. I'm like jittery. I'm mad. I'm overstimulated. Can I pull from this? What can I have? And giving them those actual visual cues to
Yeah.
use. I think is so powerful.
Yeah. I think too, one of the areas and one of the senses that is really huge too, and I think you hear so much about it, especially when your kids are younger, is like eating, right? Like that scent, like the eating and like the textures and, pick the picky eater, they get labeled like the picky eater, or my child only eats like these three things. How do you help with that? Because I think that can be so challenging for a parent too. How do you distinguish between, like, are they actually just a picky eater, or is there maybe something more going on here?
Oh, I could go on a soapbox about this one.
Okay.
So, first of all, I am not at all a fan of that term picky eater
Okay.
because, in general, and it is an industry term, which I'll explain
Yeah.
in a second, but in general, no child wants to be challenging, right? No child wants to be difficult, quote unquote, for their parents. If it was easy to eat, they would eat it. They're not
Mhm.
choosing to not eat this food. It's hard. There's
Yeah.
always something going on. I mean, almost always something going on. I have not ever seen a child where I'm like, no, they're just choosing not to eat. Where it is difficult. So there is some difficulty underneath that. But we do actually have classifications.
Okay.
And so we do have a classification of a picky eater versus what we call a problem feeder. And so a problem feeder is somebody who's eating like less than 20 foods. I always hear my parents say, I can literally count on one hand how
Mhm.
many foods they eat. Like we're down at like 3 to 5 foods. They ignore entire food groups. So, like, no vegetables, no fruit, no protein is the general ones. When you introduce a new food, it's a constant fight.
Mhm.
You have to typically make them a different food than the family. Maybe they eat at a different time than the family. Versus a picky eater, they're maybe eating 30 or more foods, which seems like a lot. I know most parents are going to be sitting here like, no way does my kid eat 30 foods. But when you list them out, typically you're like a little bit more surprised at what they're eating.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a little bit more strong on their preferences, but they don't break down when you introduce a new food the same way.
Mhm.
So there is kind of those two different categories.
Yeah. And then how do you help that? I mean, you can distinguish that so they come to you, but a parent that's like so frustrated, or they're like, you're gonna sit here until you eat, like, but there actually is a problem. Like,
Mhm.
like, what do you do?
Well, I personally like to use what we call the SOS approach to eating. And so it's a step-by-step approach where we start from, can you even be in the same room as a food, right? Like some kids, and actually people laugh because my husband, right? He is a sensory child at heart. If I bring a banana into the house, it is challenging for him. It is challenging to be in the kitchen with a banana with that smell. So we're starting anywhere from being in the same room
Wow.
all the way until, how do I touch this food? How do I interact with this food? Can I smell it? From there, can I maybe, touch it to my nose, my face, my mouth? Then we're moving to licking, biting, and eating. And so we help kids walk up these steps, but we do it in a way that's actually enjoyable for them, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not going to sit them down at a table and say, take a bite, take a bite, take a bite, because now I'm forcing their sensory system and their body to do something that doesn't feel good. They're not
Yeah.
going to want to eat it. So we do it in a way that's actually fun and engaging. And my goal is always they should be the ones taking that bite on their own. I want them to be the one who decided to do it.
So that sounds like it could definitely take a while. Like, it's
Yes.
not gonna be something that happens overnight. Like, that sounds like that could take like months potentially till that ever happens, if it happens.
Yes. I will say that approach does take longer, but per the research and per my own personal experience, it lasts longer. So
Yeah.
it takes longer, but over time, it actually has better results than using that more, we call it like authoritarian parenting, where you're
Mhm.
take a bite, you listen to me, I'm the parent. That sometimes has quicker results, but they don't last and they don't make independent eaters. Which
Mhm.
isn't that our goal, right? To make our kids independent.
Yeah. Oh, well, I love that, and I love how you are just working on that whole, like, holistic person, that holistic child. So them like also knowing their bodies, knowing what feels good, knowing what tastes good, knowing how they can help themselves too, especially as they're getting older, to be able to live a joyful life and not, so your husband can have a banana around the house.
We have come far.
Oh,
When we
good.
first met, no fruits, no vegetables, hardly any proteins.
Wow.
Yeah, now he'll
Wow.
eat most proteins, most vegetables. Banana is the holdout.
Yeah. Wow. And it's like, you don't have to like everything. Like, that's the thing. It's like, you don't have to like
No.
everything. And just because I like it doesn't mean you have to like it. It'll be so interesting. I can't wait to have you back after you have your child and they're a little bit older and just see how it's going for you. Because I used to be a school teacher and I always say, like, just because I was educated as a teacher, like master's degree teacher, autism certification, like it doesn't mean I know how to do anything with my own children. Like, it's totally different. So it'll be so fun to have you come back, and maybe you'll be like the one that's like, nope, nope, my child is great and all these things that I know work, and I can't wait.
In the therapy field, we always joke because it seems to be whatever your profession is where your child maybe has a little more difficulty. Like I've had friends who are PTs and they're like, my kid will not roll. My friends who are feeding therapists, they're like, they're having such a hard time eating.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
know there will be one.
Yeah, yeah, at least one. Oh, I love it. Is there anything you have shared such great nuggets? I've taken so many great notes. Is there anything that you feel like you haven't said that's like on your heart for like the moms today?
Yeah, I think the one thing I want parents to know the most is you're doing great. Like, it is hard. This is not an easy journey, a sensory journey, a feeding journey. There are a lot of ups and downs. And so often parents will peg themselves as a failure because their child is struggling. And that's not at all the case. Usually, you guys are doing everything you possibly can to support them. And it really is a frustratingly long and slow journey. But just taking those small steps put you in the right direction. And so hang in there. You are doing great, and your child appreciates it more than you know.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful. If there are people that I know, well, when this episode comes out, you already have had your child. So I'm like, well, you're getting ready to take a little bit of a break. But when people want to find you and find more information about you, where is a great place for them to go?
Yeah, the best place is my website, drsamgoldman.com. I have some freebies on there. That's usually where I recommend people start, just because it helps you kind of get an idea of, like you said, what is sensory processing?
Hmm.
What is going on at the table? And so I have a challenge for parents called Camp Food Explorers, where they can learn how to introduce a food to their child in a way that works with their body in just 3 days. And then I have another one called Self Regulation Skills, and that will help a parent start to help their child connect those regulation skills and that self regulation to their body. So that's why I recommend they start.
Cool. Yeah. So I'll definitely link that in the show notes, and then people can go, and if one of those freebies sounds right up your alley, or you just want to kind of look a little bit more, then that'll be awesome. Thank you so much for being here. The question that I love to end every single episode with, this is my only scripted question, is we as women tend not to celebrate ourselves enough. So I would love to know, what is something that you love about yourself right now, Samantha?
Surprisingly, and I feel like so many people are going to roll their eyes at this answer, I love being pregnant. I
Oh,
really do. It's been a really fun 9 months for me.
yeah.
Um, and I love having this little guy in here and kicking and feeling all those little things. So that is actually what I am definitely loving right now.
Yeah, I just recorded on Samantha's podcast, and so I'm not sure when that will come out in relation to this one, but I shared that I loved being pregnant at, knowing that like it was almost like your little secret, like when the baby was kicking or fluttering or doing whatever, punching your belly, like all the different things. It was like if you didn't tell anyone, like it was just your little secret between like you and the little one. And I just loved that about being pregnant. So no one is rolling their eyes at you, my friend.
I know I'm definitely one of the lucky ones who's had an easier pregnancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much for being here today and just sharing all of your insight and all of your knowledge into sensory processing and how parents can be that advocate for their child and then how their children can also learn to advocate for themselves as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.